Welcome to today's panel discussion on what can labor do to build on this unusually promising moment. I'm Steve Greenhouse, a senior fellow at the Century Foundation, which is joined with the American Prospect magazine to sponsor today's discussion. Today we have several terrific speakers: Sarah Nelson, president of the Association of Flight Attendants; Chris Smalls, president of the Amazon Labor Union, which pulled off the historic union victory on Staten Island; Jazz Bezak, a barista and one of the Starbucks union's lead organizers; and Joseph Mccartney, a labor historian at Georgetown University. I will be moderating today's discussion along with Harold Meyerson, editor-at-large at the American Prospect. Please note that this event is being recorded and live-streamed. If you'd like to submit a question for our panelists, please do so using the YouTube chat feature. So why do we say this is such a promising moment for labor? Can anyone think of another time in the past 50 years when there's been so much excitement about unions? There was the Amazon union's David versus Goliath win in Staten Island. 8 months ago, not a single corporate-owned Starbucks was unionized. Now over 200 are. Whoever thought we'd see a unionized Apple store? But not only did one unionize in Maryland, we're seeing efforts to unionize other Apple stores and REI stores and Chipotle's. Even workers at a Lululemon in Washington have petitioned for a union election. At 3 p.m. today, in just a few minutes, the NLRB will begin counting votes to determine whether a Trader Joe's in Hadley, Massachusetts will become the nation's first unionized Trader Joe's. Then there were the union wins at Activision and among 600 workers at the New York Times, plus all the unionization in museums and newsrooms and among grad students and adjunct professors and in hospitals. I've never seen so much pro-union energy. A Gallup poll found that 68% of Americans approve of unions, the highest level since 1965. Young workers are especially jazzed about unions. 77% of Americans aged 18 to 34 approve of unions. A new study found that 3 out of 4 workers aged 18 to 24 said they'd vote to join a union if they could. 3 out of 4. Many workers are fed up with America's huge income inequality. Many workers are angry about how they were treated during the pandemic. Many young workers are frustrated about student debt loads and high rents and hearing that they'll be the first generation in US history to do worse than their parents. Many workers are inspired by Black Lives Matter, by the Me Too movement, by the Fight for 15. All this is pushing workers to embrace unions as a strategy, as a way to improve their jobs and their lives. Thanks to all this energy, unions may finally have a real opportunity to reverse their decades-long decline. A big question is what can be done to build on this moment, notwithstanding corporate America's ferocious opposition to unions. Another big question: are the nation's major unions doing nearly enough to help rev things up? Today, we will discuss what can workers' allies do to expand on this moment, to help unions grow and to help lift workers faster and further. Can this promising moment be turned into a truly lasting, larger movement? So we will start now with Sarah Nelson, a truly inspiring voice for the nation's workers. Sarah has been president of the Association of Flight Attendants since 2014. It's a union with 50,000 members from 20 airlines. Sarah, welcome. So to begin, Sarah, what in your view has made this such a promising moment for labor?
Stephen, thank you for the invite, and thank you to the Century Foundation and to the American Prospect. This is such an important conversation, and it doesn't get as much airtime as it needs because the people who are in control of communications in this country, the people who are in control of our government, are fewer and fewer with more and more money. So thank you so much for this opportunity. But this is a promising moment. Well, you take the optimism out of that, and I can't help but get a little choked up as you list the numbers of campaigns and the numbers of workers standing up, taking action, the young people who are excited to join unions. Obviously, that gets me very excited because I know that this is the way that we are going to change all the things that are making people hurt today. And that is really where the excitement comes from, is that these next generations do not have it better than their parents. We are going backward. We're fighting on the same fights that we were fighting over 100 years ago. It is pretty extraordinary that the union that helped to kick off major organizing almost 100 years ago, the United Mine Workers of America, and helped us set certain standards for working people in this country, for the bargain that if you give of your life a good, decent amount of work, take pride in that work, give into the American economy and contribute to that, that in exchange for that, you can have a decent retirement, you can have a decent life, your children can have an education, and you can work to make your lives better and enjoy that with vacation, sick leave, and healthcare to be able to take care of your families. And so the demands that were set over 100 years ago from the United Mine Workers of America, and in that explosion of organizing that happened in the 30s, were around the 8-hour day. It was around fighting for healthcare and Social Security, and that security in our retirement, and then pension plans. And it was all centered around unions, and it was centered around safe workplaces too. We have Chris Smalls is on here today. What got him activated was that his company fired him after he took action just for safety in his workplace. So we're fighting the same fights that we were fighting 100 years ago. We're not moving forward, we're moving backward. And that is because the number of people in this country, the number of working people in this country who are unionized has been on the decline. While in our political system, there has been an increase of the union busting that happens, the 4 Ds of union busting: divide, delay, distract, and demoralize, and have given working people the idea that there's nothing that we can do about it, that we're a divided nation, that we're a divided people. And the truth is that we're finding out, actually, and in the course of this pandemic, it made it all the more apparent that working people are treated as a line item. They are treated as disposable, that in every single industry, all of these industries are figuring out how to terminate pensions, eliminate pensions, decrease pensions, cut pay, make people work more for less, cut the ability to have time with your family, cut vacations, cut the ability to have sick leave, affordable health care, and to have a decent life. And so that is really where this is coming from, because people understand that we are in this together. They're starting to understand that we're a working class. They are starting to understand that we don't just live in a democracy, we live in capitalism. And unchecked capitalism is not good because it's only about profits. It's not about people at all.
Thanks for that great answer, Sarah. So, one big focus today is, what can we do? What can workers do? What can labor unions do? What can labor federations do? What can workers' allies do to really build on this moment, to expand on it? What do you think should be done, Sarah?
So let me give you some examples, Stephen. First and foremost, we have to get out on every single picket line where workers are taking a stand and striking, because other workers are seeing, with a union, you can make a difference. You can make a difference in a matter of weeks, a matter of months. When I've been voting and I feel like nothing has changed for years and it's only gotten worse. So support those strikes. The United Mine Workers in Alabama, we got to help end that strike with a victory. And so we've got to stand up for that. But we also have to look where these billionaires are trying to crush unions. They're trying to crush unions by firing people, by closing down stores, by refusing to recognize the ALU, by putting a ballot box when the NLRB said that they could not in Bessemer, Alabama, when that ballot box was put there in violation of not only federal law, but an order from the NLRB. Every person in the labor movement should have said, we're going to stop working until the labor rights that we have today are enforced. That was a huge moment, and it was in the middle of the pandemic, and we can look back on that, but we need to look for those opportunities where we can call out these bad actors. We have to stand up to the billionaires and let them know that if they think that they are going to minimize the NLRB by making sure that it can't get funding, by making sure that the people who are directing it against workers, it doesn't matter, because workers have the power when we stand together, and we've got to stand up and for each other. Chris Smalls is doing a service for unions everywhere. He is out there running as fast as he can, meeting with Amazon workers around this country, but also taking every single interview, every single convention invitation, every single opportunity to talk about the fact that workers have power if we join together. And that makes it very difficult then for him, he's one person, to then also be with his incredible organizing committee in Staten Island to take on Amazon, get them to the table. He's working on that too with all the lawyers, but we need to get around the people who have had these wins, make sure the wins stick, make sure that we can grow those wins, stand up for the Starbucks workers everywhere who are striking against the draconian treatment from Howard Schultz. We have to stand up and show that these people are the villains. We have to show which side we're on. And we have to demonstrate worker power by standing together and taking on every time that workers are trying to be cast aside and ultimately put to a place of demoralized because they feel like they can't change anything, because they feel like everything is against them.
So at this time, when we're seeing more efforts to unionize than we've seen in years, and NLRB just said there's a 58% increase in union petitions filed in the first 9 months of this year. So we're seeing this huge surge in unionization efforts, but we're also seeing this huge surge in union busting efforts. At Amazon, as Chris Smalls could tell us, at Starbucks, as Jazz Rizak can tell us, at Apple, at REI, many other places. So Sarah, what do you think unions, workers should do to try to overcome this huge anti-union effort by so many companies in corporate America?
Look, what we have to do is we have to build worker power. And the way that we will build worker power is to have people understand that as working people, we have way more in common than we have that's different. We cannot shy away from the social issues that are in our face today. Unions are for all working people. Take, for example, the attack on women's reproductive rights. This is an attack on women. This is an attempt to dehumanize women. In an organizing campaign, if you suddenly gain the support of half of your workforce, you have a huge leg up. Who can ever do that? What they're trying to do is to minimize, demonize, dehumanize half of the working class in this country. That's what they're trying to do. And we have to recognize that these social attacks, the attack on Black lives, the attack on any marginalized community, the attack on immigrants, this is all about dividing workers, making us feel like we're in competition with each other, rather than understanding that social justice is directly tied to economic justice. So that is probably the most important things that unions can be doing right now, is helping working people see and understand that the labor movement is for all working people. It is not a stereotype that they may have in their minds when flight attendants are out there saying, we are union. We are demanding of our management to come to us and come to our terms. We are setting the terms. We're not willing to get on that plane if it's unsafe. People are saying, I didn't know flight attendants were union members. And suddenly in their workplaces too, they can see themselves that they could form a union because they never imagined that this was something for them. So we understand an incredible responsibility that we have as people who have been traditionally marginalized to stand up, to lead in our unions, and to show in this moment that this is a place where we can come together, and through that solidarity, we can actually win.
So I would be ungrateful if I didn't thank you for displaying my book, Beaten Down, Worked Up, on your bookshelf behind me. So you are in the middle of one of the biggest unionization drives in the nation right now, trying to organize 22,000 flight attendants at Delta Airlines. Can you tell us about how that's going, and are you trying to catch and raise the pro-union wave we're seeing now? Is that helping you?
The biggest difference with this campaign, and Delta flight attendants have been trying to organize for decades. The last time they got to an election was 2010. Delta has hired half of the flight attendants since then. So half the flight attendants have never been through this before. And these are mostly the people who are leading this campaign. And what's different now is that we have extraordinary energy in Atlanta where we never have before, where Delta has successfully divided the workers based on age, based on race, based on gender, based on social issues, and tried to put itself out as the defender of these issues, rather than making it possible for the union workers to come together. So what we are seeing, because of what's happening all over the country at Starbucks, at Amazon, the fights with the bakery workers at the grocery stores, is that we are seeing a tremendous insurgence of excitement in our Delta campaign. We have flight attendants coming up to us in the airport terminals saying, you know, I've never thought that I needed the union. I was never for that. I kind of thought that Delta had my back. They call it a family, but I'm being told by the people that I trust, by Elizabeth Warren, by Bernie Sanders, by Joe Biden, that I should be a union supporter, and that this is what's wrong with the country, is that we don't have enough people who are union members. And so if I believe in these things, then I should sign a card. It's that simple. And then we have others who say, I never thought anything could change, so I decided not to get involved, but I see what Starbucks workers are doing. I see what's happening at Amazon. This is exciting. I want to do this too. And we're building community support in this Delta campaign, and it's making all the difference.
So, Sarah, you often say something that in ways sounds very simple, but is profound when you're talking to audiences of workers interested in unionizing, or labor leaders who aren't doing enough unionizing. You say, you know, what it takes is trying. You have to try something. That's what it takes, because if you don't try, you're not going to be able to unionize. Can you, explain more about what you mean on that?
Well, look, I always go back to Mother Jones' quote, the great labor organizer from 100 years ago, who was speaking with people who, in some cases, were being hanged for what they believed in, were being burned alive, were being shot at, real violence. And in the face of all of that, she said to the workers, she said, you will fight and win, you will fight and lose, but you must fight. If you don't fight, you can't win. And so if you don't try, you can't win. And if you think about all the organizing that happened all over the media sector, that was simply workers at Gawker trying to form a union and then inspiring this incredible explosion of organizing all across journalism, all across all kinds of newsrooms and all kinds of media outlets. And the same thing happened in Buffalo. And I'll let Jazz talk about this more, of course, but they just tried at that one store. Richard Benzinger said, we just have to win one. And I don't think he even knew how profound that was when he said that, but that was true. People just had to see that it was possible. And that inspired other people to come along too. You just have to try. You just have to get out there and do it.
Sarah, that was great. Thank you very much. I will now pass the baton to Harold Meyerson, who's going to speak to Chris and Jazz. And thanks very much, Sarah. Thanks for
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Wonderful insights.
Well, thank you, Steve and Sarah. It is great to be here. One of the possible genesis, whatever the plural of Genesis may be, of this event is that Stephen and I, for the first time in our respective careers, wrote a story together that we ran on the American Prospect website that noted, picking up on Sarah's reference to we're back to 100 years ago, that noted that when the huge burst in unionization of the 1930s, which carried over into the 1940s, when it began, there was a massive investment from at least two major unions, the United Mine Workers, which were probably the most powerful and wealthiest union, and the Amalgamated Clothing Workers, headed respectively by John L. Lewis and Sidney Hillman. And what they did was not only make a massive investment, hiring hundreds and hundreds, probably more than 1,000 organizers in all, to deal with the core industries at that point in the United States, steel and auto in particular, above all. But they also said, and you're going to have your own union. We're not going to add you to the United Mine Workers. There's going to be a new thing called the United Auto Workers, a new thing called the United Steel Workers. And this really had a profound effect. And I'm citing this because as we contemplate what is really required to take these remarkable achievements that we're talking about here today and expand them to something that could be as transformative as the 1930s were for American workers, we need to keep those sorts of things in mind. So with that, I'm going to talk to Chris and Jazz, going back and forth here. So, and what I kind of want to do is get their some sense of what they think has been accomplished thus far, what they have done so far, and then kind of push a little on what is required to make these exemplary events not simply exemplary, but really life-changing for an American society that really could use a life change. 6-7 months ago, essentially nobody had heard of the two people I'm about to talk to. But then there's that line from the Ralph Waldo Emerson poem, "Fired the shot around the world." Well, I think, Chris, you and your co-workers in the ALU fired a shot that was heard around the world, and so too for jazz and your fellow baristas, who now stretch all across the United States. So, I begin with a little note that having written about labor since God knows when, the late 1970s, I am in awe of you guys. I'm used to writing about, things that don't work out that well. And you guys have given not only the American progressive and labor movement a ray of hope, but for those of us who've been writing about this during what has not been a great period for American workers, a particular thank you to both of you. Let's start with you, Chris. When you talk about what you guys did at Staten Island in JFK 8, you talk about building, a real particular culture where you made it clear that you guys were really the ones who had your fellow workers' backs, that you were there, you did all kinds of things. Now, in looking more broadly at Amazon, all of the Amazon warehouses share the same really god-awful working conditions. You're being subjected to surveillance. You have all these metrics to meet. You kind of run yourselves ragged. And Jeff Bezos and the leaders of Amazon have assumed that, the average Amazon worker will burn out in under a year because the work is not sustainable. So that you've got as a common factor in all the Amazon warehouses. You don't have as a common factor the kind of dedicated core of people who do the sorts of things you did at Staten Island. So talk about that for a minute. How do you go about with your, obviously limited resources, although I know you yourself are going everywhere. How do you go about seeing that those cultures get built in other warehouses? Where do you start? Where do you go?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Harold, for having me, and thank you all for being on this panel. That's a good question. Where do we start? And I think we already proven that, it's not about money. It's not about resources. The campaign that we ran in Staten Island, when it came down to it, all it did was create a culture that showed the workers that we care for one another. We showed our coworkers that we are the ones that are going to listen to you. We're the ones that's going to be there for you. We're the ones that's going to be a shoulder to lean on if you have issues going on at home. We're the ones that truly care about one another, because Amazon obviously doesn't. And that culture is starting to resonate across the country. There has been, over the course of the last couple of years, especially during the pandemic, there's been other buildings that have core or key organizing efforts. The building in Chicago, Queens, Amazon United, them folks have been around for years already organizing a worker cooperative that is helping their culture and their facility for their own needs. That's why we've been seeing, many walkouts that happen. I think one just happened down in Atlanta. There was also one a couple of months ago in Queens. And these things are the building out in Minneapolis as well. They've been doing some great actions with the Muslim community there. So these things already had existed, but now it's starting to reach on a broader scale, other facilities, especially with the wind in Staten Island. Other workers are reaching out to us daily, asking how can we get involved with either the ALU or get involved in their own independency to create their own culture in their facility. And that's where we're at right now. We're in that position where we can share our knowledge, share our expertise. We can share the things that's going to happen once they go public. And that's a great position to be in, because now we can tell workers and navigate our coworkers on how to avoid being retaliated, how to avoid the rabbit holes that the company has when it comes to union busting, and also how to remain really resilient. You know, you're going to be facing some real disgusting tactics, from being demonized to being isolated to being drilled with propaganda put into captive audiences, like Amazon did in Staten Island. They put us in over 3,000 of these captive audiences. So to prepare yourselves mentally, you're going to have to create a foundation that you're going to have to lean on, and a culture that you're going to have to be a part of to battle that onslaught. And it's happening.
Thank you, Chris. Jazz, you have a different kind of industrial structure than the one Chris is working in. Chris works in a place where there are thousands of workers in the workplace. You work in a place where there may be a dozen, or if it's a huge Starbucks, 2 dozen, you know, or a larger Starbucks. But you've somehow managed, as we speak, Workers United has now won the representation elections at a little more than 200 Starbucks. How much are you able to convey to when someone from a Starbucks somewhere at the other side of the country whom you've never met reaches out to you? What do you say to them, and what in particular is it about either the baristas or Starbucks culture or whatever that has propelled this? And, you know, other than the fact that they've seen it done first by you folks in Buffalo and increasingly around the country.
Well, thank you. And first, let me just start by saying it's so amazing to be here with all of y'all, all the amazing panelists. I mean, you know, I've said this before, but Sarah Nelson was, you know, spoke to our first committee meeting in Buffalo and really made it seem like it was going to be possible when, you know, we didn't know if it was going to be possible. And thanks to you, Harold, and to Steve for, you know, covering this. And, you know, as a labor journalist, that made me realize that when I was first starting at 18, that, you know, union organizing wasn't just something that you read about, it was something that you could actually do. So in terms of, you know, conversations with Starbucks partners across the country, I don't think, you know, there's anything incredibly different about Starbucks or about Starbucks workers. I do think that, you know, like all workers, Starbucks workers are an incredible, you know, source of energy and passion and creativity, but that's not, you know, unique. That's the working class. But I think so many people are drawn to work at Starbucks because of the values that this company professes, which, you know, they tell us they're a different kind of company. They tell us, you know, that it's a safe space if you're LGBTQ, if you're, you know, they gave us Black Lives Matter t-shirts. They, you know, say that they believe in sustainability and climate justice. And, you know, I think the kind of people who are attracted to work there have those values and also therefore have union rights as the core value. So I think, you know, we call ourselves partners, and Starbucks obviously means something very different when they say that, and they use that to try to tell us that, you know, we don't need a union and we don't need a seat at the table. And I think to us, it really underscores, you know, if we're partners, then we really need an equal say and an equal stake in this company. And our slogan from day one was partners becoming partners, because as Lexi Rizzo, who was a 7-year shift supervisor at the Genesee Street Starbucks in Buffalo, which was one of the first 2 that unionized in December, Lexi said, you know, very early on, we fight for what we love. And I think that's what's motivated this campaign across the country, even as Starbucks has continued, you know, to respond with fear and threats and, you know, scorched earth union busting tactics, is partners keep coming together because we're all fighting for love and solidarity with each other.
Let me ask you both a question about resources. As Sarah indicated, Chris, you kind of have chosen to run yourself ragged going around the country. And obviously, it's good for the people who hear you that you're going around the country. But I'm sure at some moments you've thought about, well, there should be more of me. We need a larger organization. What would you really like to see in terms of help from the established labor movement?
Yeah, thank you, Harold. Yeah, Sarah, me and Sarah talk quite often. I'm always dealing with flight issues now. So she's more than just a comrade. Trust me, she's my guidance and when I'm freaking out in the airport. Yeah, right now, this is a moment for the established unions to really support the efforts of the Amazon labor union and also the Starbucks campaigns that are springing off across the country, because we're going at it in a non-traditional style. This is a new style of organizing, new century, new generation, whatever you want to call it, new school. We're doing it differently. We're trying to counteract what's been happening with these campaigns, and to do that, we couldn't do what traditional unions have been doing in the past. Hasn't been working, hasn't worked for 28 years at Amazon. Obviously, I was conscious enough to know that when I went down to Alabama and I seen some of the opportunities that they had, the missed opportunities that was aware to us, or to the Amazon workers I was with, Derek Palmer and the rest of the organizers from Amazon Labor Union. We saw some things that, as Amazon workers ourselves, we thought that if we campaigned and we came at it from a different angle of being a colleague or a coworker or somebody who's actually clocking into the building, that the conversation will open up even better when it came to talking about unionizing. And we were right. We seen that established unions that come in sometimes, and it's hard and difficult to even teach them how to know the ins and outs of Amazon, let alone trying to have a conversation to an Amazon worker who really is disconnected from anything when it comes to organized labor. So for us, just that education was the vital key to our campaign. Originally, we had to spend several months educating our colleagues first. And as far as the established unions, I think right now what they can do, besides supporting, is helping amplify everything that we're talking about in the media, helping to demonstrate with us along the picket lines. Also, there needs to be some clear-cut messaging on one accord. I feel like when we broke down that barrier, everybody wants a piece of the pie because they've seen what happened in Staten Island. But we can't just jump right into that fight. We have to make sure it's strategic. We have to make sure that there's people involved that are actual workers of Amazon, and make sure that the workers are leading the fight. Workers need to be in the driver's seat.
I think one thing that's clear from the experience of both of you, Chris and Jazz, is that you each have put kind of a new face, not just your faces, but you're coming at your fellow workers as this new generation of fellow workers, which is, I think, a lot of what we're doing. When Jazz, when Chris talks about what it takes to expand, I would assume that you're going to keep rolling on. There will be many more Starbucks facilities that will be unionized, but it seems to me that to get someone like Howard Schultz to say, okay, you're the union, you're going to at some point have to do what unions have had to do under those circumstances, which is strike or consumer support / boycott like the farm workers did. Talk about that for a minute.
No, I think that's absolutely right. We can't let Starbucks get away with the kind of things that they're doing. And I think, this campaign isn't fundamentally different from any previous campaigns. I mean, I'm inspired by Workers United as the outgrowth of the old garment workers unions. And, you know, our current organizing internship training program is named after Ida Brayman, who is a 17-year-old immigrant from Ukraine who is fleeing, you know, anti-Semitic violence, and moved to Rochester, where she got a job in a sweatshop. And she went on a general strike in 1913 with her coworkers, and, you know, a sweatshop owner fired into the crowd and murdered her. And out of her death came, you know, the victory in the strike that led to Rochester's garment industry becoming 100% unionized. And I think what we're doing in our industry is very similar, but it took a general strike for them to win it. I think it could take, you know, a strike or a boycott. Obviously, we're not there yet, but we're going to need the support of all of our comrades in the labor movement. And I want to thank everyone who's been helping us and everyone who's been leading the way. I mean, one of my favorite ways of thinking about the labor movement is, my first rodeo was the Nissan campaign in Mississippi. And that campaign had, you know, an incredible committee, incredible workers like Morris Mock and Travis Parks, who were really fighting for the right to organize and fighting, you know, the same battles that we're fighting, including Nissan and Starbucks both were using Littler Mendelson as their law firm. And I think, you know, Nissan didn't have to pay a consequence for the union busting that they waged against those workers. And I think it's going to take all of us to make Starbucks pay that consequence. But I mean, the RWDSU not only, I think, led an amazing campaign that really, you know, brought to the forefront that, you know, unions were going to be front page of the New York Times and have, you know, countdowns to their election. And, you know, I want to thank them for doing that before we launched our campaign, because I think we wouldn't have gotten nearly the support that we did had that not happened. And then they've been, you know, running the campaign in a lot of ways in Birmingham, Alabama, opening up their union hall to us, helping with mapping and legal support. And the letter carriers and the CWA in Roanoke, Virginia have been, you know, really supporting the campaigns there. So I want to thank all the unions for doing everything that y'all have already been doing for us, but I think we're definitely going to have to gear up because, you know, we can't let Starbucks keep getting away with union busting.
Okay, well, you two stay around, please, because we're going to be having more discussion with you. But for the moment, I want to talk to Joe Mccartney, who is, I think, an absolutely terrific labor historian who can bring up all kinds of precedents of labor management relations that most of us either didn't know or have forgotten about, particularly, for instance, in the World War I era. Joe is not only a history professor at Georgetown, but he is also the director of, I think I'll get this name right, the Klomanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor at Georgetown, where they have developed further developed the idea of bargaining for the common good, which is a way of coming to the bargaining table with demands not just for the workers, but for the communities in which those workers live and work. So a contributor to today's current labor issues, as well as a pretty darn good source for what the unions have done in the past. Joe, this is quite a breakthrough we're seeing right now. How would you compare this generation of workers to, let's say, the generation of workers in the 1930s, which is, you know, the period of this great union advance? There are distinct generations in regards to workers' attitude towards unions, right?
That's absolutely right, Harold. And first, let me just say what a pleasure and an honor to take part in this discussion. But as I was listening to Sarah and Jazz and Chris speak, I was hearing in my mind echoes of oral histories I've heard of workers organizing in the Great Depression, and just how parallel the struggles are and the impetus behind the organizational effort. The fight to build solidarity, it's the same today as it was then. And, you know, I think one thing that's true in both eras is that young people have been leading the way. Sarah talked about the recent hires at Delta leading the way there. Jazz and her colleagues at Starbucks, mostly young people, Chris, and he's a young man in a position of leadership of his union. it makes me think about the people who built the unions in the 1930s. We think about John L. Lewis, of course, the head of the mine workers, or Sidney Hillman. But the people on the ground actually built the CIO were young people like Jazz and Chris. James Carey, who built the UE in Philadelphia. He was 22 when he got involved in the union. He was 25 by the time he became president of the United Electrical Workers, part of the CIO. Eula McGill, who helped to organize textile workers in Alabama. She was about Jazz's age when she got involved in the 1934 textile strike. And it's often been the younger generation that at a critical moment steps forward to build something new and powerful. That's been labor's past. Sam Gompers was a young man when he became head of the AFL. He was only 36 at that time. He was only in his mid-20s when he became elected to his first local presidency. Young people have often led the way. That was true in the 30s. And what I think is remarkable about this moment is the way you do see a young generation of people coming together to really fight in the ways that we're hearing about.
Yes. Also, thank you for reminding me that Samuel Gompers was once young. I don't think anyone has ever said that to me.
We tend to think of him as the old man he was at the end, but not all.
The old man and the old guard. Well, it was his organization that was the old guard, from which Lewis and Hillman said no more. Labor's got to go off structurally in a new direction with a lot of clout. I mean, what is your take on the idea that Steve and I put forth, that that they should really not only be jumping in with huge resources to the kind of struggles that Jazz and Chris are spearheading, but also saying, to echo what Jazz and Chris have said, you guys really have, the currency, the credibility with this new younger generation of workers, and these need to be your organizations. What do you think of that as a possibility right now?
I think you and Steve have raised a very important point about what made the 1930s movement the great leap forward that it became. And it was a courageous decision by some. Let's be frank, it was not all, and it split the labor movement because not everybody was ready to take that step forward. But John L. Lewis, Sidney Hillman, as you point out, were among those who were. And basically what they did was rather remarkable. They used their union resources and dues. So the dues paid by miners hired organizers that organized steel workers, that hired organizers that organized auto workers. And they built unions by being able to rethink what solidarity means. So there are different ways solidarity is at the cornerstone of what labor is. And sometimes we think of it as an institutional solidarity to protect our union and to protect it from the threats that, let's face it, in the American context, labor unions have always been under attack. And there is a way in which American unions can be and historically have been at times defensive-minded. But at moments of great opportunity, it's important to come out of that defensive stance and be willing to make the kind of investments that Lewis and Hillman made, and to trust workers that they would build something that would strengthen the mine workers and the clothing workers. If you'll permit just a short quote from Lewis, in 1935, he addressed the AFL, and this is what he said: "The labor movement is organized on the principle that the strong shall help the weak. Isn't it right that we should contribute something of our own strength toward those less fortunately situated? Organize the unorganized, and in so doing, you make the American Federation of Labor the greatest instrumentality that's ever been forged in the history of modern civilization to befriend the cause of humanity and champion human rights." So he was basically saying, AFL, we've got to, help these people who need to be organized, and we have to take a risk to do it. Sadly, the AFL didn't take up that challenge, and so Lewis had to go off on his own to do it. I think one lesson we should hopefully take today is let's not repeat that. Let's provide the space and the resources to build the kinds of things that Jazz and Chris are trying to build. One of the sad outcomes of the way the 30s movement went forward is that labor did split, and that rivalry really hurt. It really hurt in its effort to consolidate what it won. We need to be able to take risks now. We need to stay together. We need to not become divided. And I think you and Steve have really posed an important way to think about that.
Well, I think we're at that point where we want to engender a cross discussion among all of our panelists. Stephen, you want to?
Sure. Thank you. So now we're going to, Joe, that was great.
was.
And Chris, that was great. So let's bring everyone together for hopefully a single unified conversation of solidarity. So Sarah, you've been very patient listening to everyone. Do you have, do you want to respond to what they said? Do you have any question you want to pose to Chris or Jazz or Joe?
Well, look, I think what Joe was getting to at the end here is the issue of jurisdiction. And we have, as the labor movement has continued to shrink in recent decades, we have gone into more and more of a protective crouch. And as we've done that as well, it's become very comfortable to be a bit irrelevant. So if you're unseen, maybe you can just get by and nobody will come and sort of disturb what you're doing. And none of that leads to what Joe was ending with there, with taking risks and really understanding that this is solidarity. And solidarity is not sometimes when new union members are brought in and taught how to be new union reps and shop stewards, they're taught a solidarity that is in terms of protecting the institution. And it is important that we have workers join and build the institutions, because the institutions will last through the lean years, through the difficult times. And you have to have that. You have to have that structure to be able to maintain the workers' rights. However, we often say that, and I have said to thousands and thousands of new hire flight attendants, our union is not an institution. It's the hearts and souls of the professionals who are our flying partners, who are our coworkers. That's who the union is. And so if we take that view and we recognize that it's really important to lift up workers who want to form the unions wherever they are. If every single union out there devoted all of their resources to organizing, we would not have enough resources to meet the demand of the American worker right now. So what we need to do is we need to be very clear in setting jurisdictional issues aside. Every second that we spend on fighting each other, cutting up turf, feeling like unions own workers rather than workers own unions, we are just handing away power to the corporate elite. We are handing it right to them. So I think the issue of jurisdiction is one of the issues that we really have to tackle, that we have to understand how it is used to divide us, how it is used to cut up our resources, how it is used to make us fail in the face of horrible union busting, and actually just help workers everywhere who want to form their unions, get them their unions, get them their resources to form their unions, and support anyone who is organizing. And if there is an organizing campaign that is going and strong and taking on the boss, then let's not think about how we cut that up. Let's figure out how we help that organization grow and have that power against the boss. Those are just the general ideas that I think that we need to be thinking about right now, and really helping to cut through the jurisdiction that can kill us.
I have a question for Chris and Jazz, following up on something Harold asked. Chris, you've said you've been contacted by workers at over 100 Amazon facilities who say they too are interested in forming a union. Jazz, every week, you get calls from Starbucks workers from around, dozens of stores around the country. So what do you do when you get these people saying we want to unionize too? How do you educate them? How do you, walk them through what they need to do to unionize? How do you build on the wonderful things you've already done?
Can I jump in there?
Sure.
So I just want to talk about maybe the best intake call of my life, which was after getting a few emails back and forth on Martin Luther King Day of this year. I got a phone call from one of our Memphis partners, and you know, as somebody who spent a lot of time in Mississippi, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, this is the closest we'd gotten to Mississippi at that point. And the workers were immediately, I would talk to Nikki Taylor over the phone, and Nikki was like, we're ready. We already have, you know, a committee ready to go. Like, let's jump on Zoom. So we all jumped on Zoom, and Nikki and Nebretta and all of the other amazing organizers at the Poplar and Highland store were like, we're going public today because it's Martin Luther King Day. He gave his life to, you know, fighting for workers' rights and union rights in Memphis, and we're launching. And they said, don't bring your union busting campaign to Memphis. And 2 weeks later, Starbucks had fired the entire committee and, you know, tried to send a message to workers across the country that, you know, if you try to unionize, this is what's going to happen to you too. And that's what they keep doing with benefits threats, with store closures, with firings, with everything. And I think the fact that, you know, for all of Starbucks' attempts to stop the campaign, workers have been overcoming it and fighting back and realizing that, you know, even with their latest attempts to change everyone's availability and force people out, that there are certain things that only a union can prevent the company from being able to do. You know, our guidance is just, you know, here's how you join this movement and get plugged into, you know, this amazing network of people across the country. And, you know, here's, you know, how you, you know, write your letter to Howard. But I mean, people already have been following all of this. And I think the amazing thing about the moment right now is that, you know, for as much fear as there is, everybody's already been inoculated because, you know, companies aren't original. And so everything that, you know, the ALU is exposed about union busting and everything that the Delta flight attendants are exposing about union busting and everything that, you know, people are seeing on the Starbucks Workers United Twitter, people are more prepared to fight. So I think that, you know, people are ready and just need to be able to plug into something.
Chris?
Yeah, Stephen, you had the headline of the year. You know, you said we needed 10,000 of me, and
we're trying to figure out how to clone you.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to do that myself. Trust me. But you know, good thing about what we have in Staten Island, workers reach out every single day, whether it's my social media direct messages or the ALU social media direct messages. But the fact that our core organizers are all Amazon workers, and they all built their own amazing platforms now as labor leaders and warriors. They also get inquiries every day as well. And that's the best conversation to have when you have an Amazon worker and talking to an Amazon worker, especially someone that's a part of the ALU. It's very easy for us to reel workers into the unionizing efforts. And I could just tell you now, the emails, the conversations that I have and had over the last few weeks have been very powerful and also devastating. You know, when you get these emails asking about unionizing, it's because something horrible happened. We just heard about the death in my first facility, EWR 9. You know, a worker died in the warehouse, and Amazon's trying to cover it up. They're trying to sugarcoat it. They're trying to act like they took care of the family. They haven't done any of these things. And we are the ones, the union is the one that's filing the official OSHA complaint. I had to go to that facility before I hit the road. So it's about prioritizing when these workers reach out as well. We want to be there for them and educate them on what they're about to partake in when it comes to unionizing, so they know that it's a real commitment. And if they can get past that, that is a great start. You know, the rest will naturally form, you know, as we progress in our campaigns. We're going to help them. We're going to stand behind them 100%. I just got the call from another worker that went public a week ago, Eli Zing up in Seattle. The building down in Kentucky, North Carolina, Albany, New York. It's going to happen just like Starbucks, and we're going to prepare ourselves for that intake as well. And we're doing a great job so far.
Thank you. Joe, do you want to add something? Do you have any questions? Professor, do you have any questions for Chris, Sarah, or Jazz?
Just a comment maybe, and that is that, one of the things that I find most exciting about this moment is the proliferation of different approaches that's happening. We have more than one union trying at Amazon. We have more than one union trying at REI. We have different approaches happening in different places. We have more traditional campaigns. We have new kinds of things that are emerging, like CWA's Alphabet Union. And I think that the exciting thing about this moment, and again, I think it recalls the 30s, is the kind of experimental feeling that is emerging from the activism of people like Jazz and Chris. And I think that that's a lot to be excited about. And as Sarah said, jurisdictional questions have always been a thing labor has had to work through. And sometimes they can be complicated and even messy. But we can work them through. In the 30s, there were lots of complications and messiness around the creation of the CIO. At one point, there were 2 auto worker unions that were like fighting, like, what is the real auto worker union? We can build out of that. It takes leadership, it takes diplomacy, it takes, courage, I think, perhaps most of all. And that's what I identify really with Sarah and Jazz and Chris as a real common denominator, is that they have the courage to take steps forward. And that's what we need most of all.
Stephen, I have to jump in here and just, we've talked about the persistent attacks, but we also have there is a tipping point, because management is always looking at the risk. They're always determining what is the risk. What is the risk of working with the union? What is the risk of fighting the union? What is the risk of settling the contract? What is the risk of taking on the strike? And so Microsoft did this. Microsoft looked at what's happening at Starbucks and at Amazon, and they said, here's a union that is trying to organize, and it's CWA, and they're a fighting, striking union that is committed to organizing, and they said, we're not going to do it that way. And so they didn't do a neutrality agreement at Activision Blizzard out of the goodness of their hearts. They did that because they were weighing the risks there that were being very clearly delineated by ALU, by Starbucks Workers United, by RWDSU, that was willing to take up that campaign when almost no one else would have, by the bakery workers who have been on strike everywhere all around the country.
Right.
And so what we have to understand too is that uniting as a labor movement and taking this on, and understanding that we're taking this on as a working class and an organized labor movement that is committed to solidarity, we are this close to that tipping point of saying to the chamber, to the business roundtable, listen, guys, and it is mostly guys still, how do you want this to go? Because we're taking control, and we can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. And we can actually get widespread neutrality agreements, or we can do what Jazz was talking about, building up to a place where we can strike for recognition, where we can actually have widespread unionization in big swaths all at once. We're this close to building that kind of worker power. We're this close to building that kind of power with the corporations that we can negotiate directly with if we are organized together and understand that we are building this movement together. It's not all these different factions. It's all workers coming together, exercising that power, and helping the corporate elite understand that they are taking on great risk by taking us on, and then understanding that actually there never really is labor peace. You always have to keep in their minds what that risk is.
Harold, we're supposed to switch to, do you have a quick question? We're supposed to switch to audience questions now.
Let's switch to audience questions, and I'll get back to what I was about to say, which was followed up on what Sarah just said at the conclusion.
Okay, Sarah, I agree with what you said. And I often think Starbucks might have been better off if, instead of declaring war against the union from day one, just embraced them, and it might have ended up saving money, and certainly its image would have been in much better shape if it embraced the union from day one. But what do I know? Okay.
I mean, had they done that, Howard Schultz would not have made the front page of the Jerusalem Post for his Holocaust blanket comparisons. But
Well, as long as we're jumping in, I wrote an actual piece about Microsoft, and I think what was interesting about what they did was I think they may have realized that since they need to be hiring young techies, if they have a future at all, that this would be almost a competitive advantage
Yes.
over the anti-union Silicon Valley folk. If the young techies would, like the rest of their generation, be attracted to a company that says, okay, you can have some voice in what we do. You know, that's called smart management where I come from.
But we made them smart. Let's be clear.
Of course, of course. Of
They
course.
didn't come to the boardroom with those smarts. We made them have to think that way.
Unions, the CWA made them get to that, and they read the poll that said 77% of
That's right.
Americans under 30s like unions. They support unions. That's a large number.
So time for audience questions. And before I go to them, I just want to thank April and Topher for doing such a great job signing.
Yes.
We really appreciate it. So question, we're, you know, among a few retailers, we're seeing them close operations when they face a prevalent push for unionization. We saw this with Chipotle in Augusta, Maine. As Jazz can explain, we've seen Starbucks do that in Buffalo and Ithaca and some other places. So any thoughts on how consumers can be best educated to respond to this through perhaps boycotting or raising their support in some other way? And Jazz, let's start with you on that.
No, I mean, you said it. Starbucks has been, you know, this is the latest in their scorched earth tactics. They're literally, you know, combining stores into Heritage District to try to keep Pike Place and other Seattle stores from being able to unionize. They're, you know, shutting down stores when workers complain about safety issues. And the subtext, of course, now is that, oh, you want to talk about safety issues? Well, we'll just come in and close your store. So you be careful what you say about safety in your store. And I mean, we're not boycotting yet. There's a lot to be said for having customers come in and order, you know, a union strong coffee and say that they support us, because right now we're still seeing, you know, district managers and other corporate people coming into our stores and, you know, threatening us. So having that community support is amazingly helpful. But we're asking people to sign the no contract, no coffee pledge, so that, you know, as we continue to put pressure on Starbucks to, you know, finally sign the fair election principles and finally sign a contract, people are aware of any future actions.
Thank you. A question for Chris. Immigrant workers seem overlooked in the current labor moment, despite their centrality in the resurgence of the labor question. How do you think we should bring immigrants in more? And I know that immigrants played a big role, and you brought them in very well in Staten Island. So I posed that question to you about more broadly across the country. How can we bring immigrant workers more into this resurgence of labor?
Well, it's funny, you know, some immigrants workers come from countries that are predominantly unionized. So right. To be honest with you, it wasn't that hard. It wasn't that hard to have that conversation when we was talking about unions in Staten Island. There's a large West Indian population. There's a large African population. And that happens not only in Staten Island, but really across the country. Amazon workers, a huge portion of them are immigrant. And a lot of them come from countries that if you're not in the union, you're frowned upon or looked at like, you know, with 10 heads because you're not protected. And for us, you know, we just had to get over the fear aspect of it. Obviously, being undocumented or being immigrant, you know, their biggest fear is being deported because Amazon has all their information, you know, and with the AWS surveillance, the Ring, all these technology issues and technology surveillance tactics that Amazon uses, it creates that real fear of even having a conversation with somebody that's of immigrant status. So for us, it was just getting over the fear aspect, letting them know that we're going to protect them. We're going to have their back through and through. And once we had that conversation, not only did that one person sign the card, their entire household, which usually works at the same plant, they signed the card. I had during phone banking, I would call households that were immigrants, and they would say, yes, we signed the card, to me and all my brothers. And I'm like, oh, how many is it? It's 4 of us. We all work there. Perfect. Thank you. And they will go back to the building and spread that message. And we've been seeing these actions and demonstrations, once again, as I mentioned, in Minneapolis with the Muslim community, when Amazon refused to give them proper praying time. They came together and they not only got the praying time, but they got a room dedicated for that prayer time throughout the day, throughout their religion, when it happens throughout Ramadan. So it's little things like that that really show workers that we have power. We just have to use it. It's untapped power. And we're starting to break that barrier down now. And once again, the culture that we're creating, not only in Staten Island, is starting to resonate across the country, just like Starbucks is.
Another question. Chris, you scored, registered a huge win in Staten Island, historic win. Jazz, the Starbucks Workers Union has, won many historic victories. You've climbed that mountain. Sarah, hopefully you'll climb that mountain and win at Delta. Then you have to climb another big mountain. And certainly Amazon, Starbucks, probably Delta are not going to rush to sign a contract. They're going to drag it out. So with these companies evidently dragging out contract negotiations, how do you win a contract? What do you want consumers and worker allies to do to help? And politicians?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely going to take a collective action to get them to come to the table. As Sarah mentioned, the labor movement has to be on the same accord. It can't be divided. In order for Amazon to come to the table, they have to feel that pressure from all the workers in this country. Staten Island is one facility, and they're not going to recognize it. They're not going to live with the results. They're not even going to care about the verdict that's about to happen in the court hearing for our objections. So for us as organizers, as labor leaders, we can only do one thing, just prepare for the worst case scenario, which is the best case scenario. Prepare for an opportunity to withhold our labor, to get them to come to the table. And hopefully as we're building right now, we're hoping that we'll get to a point where we can just make that happen, really, not just by a tweet, but just really by picking up the phone and calling our comrades and saying, the time is now, we're going to do it on this date. And we need to make sure that everybody in the country, all the workers, all the unions are on the same accord, so that Amazon understands that we're not going anywhere, because the ALU isn't going anywhere. We're literally there to stay forever. And I think they're aware of that, but they don't want to recognize it. So we're going to have to make them feel that.
Yeah. There's a couple things, Stephen. I always say start in the workplace and the politics will follow. We have to define the problem, not only within the workplace to set our demands for these first contracts, but also define the problem for the public, so that you have the public behind us, and you have the public behind us politically too. So I'll get to that in a second. But take, for example, the Delta pilots who are fighting for their contract right now. They're standing out in front of the airport saying, do you want your pilots to be tired? That defines the problem pretty well for the public and puts a lot of pressure on Delta Airlines, right? So we need to do that. But we also have to demand of politicians. President Biden should be calling Jeff Bezos to the White House to sit down with the ALU and negotiate. We need to call on our politicians to support the idea of collective bargaining. That's not about taking a side. That's about supporting the idea of collective bargaining in this country. And that is part of what's wrong in Washington. At the same time, we have to, and hear me out here, we have to have these politicians' backs. And by that, I mean holding them accountable. So making it clear in the districts, in the states, what politicians are doing what, whether or not they stand with workers and helping people to educate people there, to hold them accountable. Because right now, the only people who have a say are the people with the money. If we don't build the people power, if we don't take on capital right where it exists and build our unions, we're not going to have the kind of power to be able to then expect of the politicians to respond to the people instead of to the money. So it goes both ways. But right now, what I would say, absolutely, that Democrats who are in control should take risks that are not real risks because they're going to reap great rewards. They should take the risks of saying to Warrior Met, you're coming to the table, you're settling this strike. Of saying to Jeff Bezos, you're coming to the table, you're recognizing the union, you're sitting down at the table to negotiate a contract. To saying the same thing to Howard Schultz. And so it goes every which way. But for us, what we can do is we can start in the workplace. We define the problem where it is. We bring workers together around those common demands. We help to define that for the community around us so that they can support us. And that builds political power then to then be able to have people in power who can support that collective bargaining process, play a mediator role, and get these things done.
Sarah, thank you. So this has been a great conversation. I'm told we have to bring things to a close before Harold will make concluding remarks. I just want to say thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jazz. Thank you, Joe. Thanks everyone from the Century Foundation and the American Prospect. Thanks to the audience. Thanks to the wonderful people who've done the signing, and great working with you, Harold. And this has been great. And Harold,
yeah,
take it to the finish line. Yeah.
One closing remark coming off what Sarah just said. I was very fortunate to be the political news editor of the LA Weekly in the 1990s, at a time when there was real ferment, particularly in the Latino and Latino immigrant communities, and organizing, and janitors, hotel workers, what have you. And a political arm of unions in LA, the County Federation of Labor, which really made being pro-union a requirement for local elected officials. And I bring that up because there were times when the janitors went in for contract negotiations that they brought the Speaker of the California Assembly to sit with them on their side of the table. That's what we need at the state level. That's what we need at the national level. And that's only going to happen if the endeavors of Chris and Jazz and Sarah and all of your co-workers continue, are supported adequately by a labor movement which does have a lot of resources that should be put into your endeavors right now. And with that, I want to again do what Steve just did, which is thank everybody and thank Steve and the Century Foundation and my magazine, The American Prospect, for hosting this. And see you all on the barricades.
See you on the barricades. Would have loved to hear one last word from you, Jazz, but thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Solidarity forever.